You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast. Join us every week for fascinating tales of rock art, adventure, and archaeology. Find our contact info in the show notes and send us your suggestions.
Hey out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is your host, Dr. Alan Garfinkel, and we're pleased to have episode 152 of your Rock Art Podcast with Stephen Townley Bassett, who is Rock Art Research Associate and someone whose familial life and genealogically has been very active in the conservation, documentation, and research of rock art in Africa, Johannesburg, and other environs as well. Stephen, are you with us?
I'm with you, Alan, and nice to be here and to chatting to you.
Well, we're honored and blessed to have you. The way we usually run this is during our first segment, I ask you the million-dollar question is, give us some background on your passion and your interest in doing this kind of work and how it developed and kind of what motivated you to be involved in this rather specialized niche.
Yes, Alan, thank you. I think it started for me when I was about 14 years old. An uncle of mine took me into the mountains in the southwestern part of South Africa, the Cederberg Mountains. And he was interested in rock art and had published a few books on the subject. He was an artist himself, a graphic designer. And in fact, my sort of history goes back 3 generations. My grandfather was very interested in rock art and he was an accountant and was looking for rock paintings in his spare time in around 1910 in the town of Oudtshoorn, in that district in the southern part of South Africa. So that was Frederick Townley. And then his son, Ginger, he was affectionately known as Ginger because he had red hair. His name was Richard. He became interested in the subject. And, when I was about 4.5, unfortunately, my father passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And it was that uncle that would come to my mother when I was young and say, what's Stephen doing these holidays? Is he knocking around? Would he like to come out into the mountains with us and, and hike and look for rock art? We're going on another trip. That was when I lived in Cape Town in South Africa. And that's where it started. So at about 14 years old, I saw my first rock painting in the Olifants River Valley. That's probably about 160 kilometers, about 100 miles north of Cape Town. And, I asked myself, the questions that I think most people ask when they are seeing rock art or looking at rock art for the first time, is who did the paintings, why were they done, when were they done, and how were they done? And I think it was the how. How were these paintings made? How come I'm still seeing them on the rock face so many hundreds and thousands of years later? And that really started my journey, as working with my uncle as a kind of apprentice, actually, doing my schooling. And then later I went to university in Cape Town. And it was that inquiry about the how, the technology behind the painting. So that's kind of when it started for me, as a schoolboy, actually.
So how did you get the expertise or background to get involved in this? Where did you go to school? What sort of degrees did you have to have? I know you're an artist. How did you learn to do art or learn about pigment or experiment with the understanding of the sophisticated way that your indigenous people, the native people of Africa, actually were able to function and create such jaw-dropping rock art?
I did art for a time at school, but I think it was after leaving school. I must say that it's been an intuitive response for me. I did a degree. I went to Rondebosch Boys School. It's a large government school in Cape Town and a good one, and still is a very strong school, probably about, maybe 800 or so pupils. And, I think, it would be about that at least. And then after that, I went to the University of Cape Town, did a social science degree in majoring in economics and psychology, and went into business. Yeah,
really?
I went into business, And
what business was that?
Well, I think coming out of a family, there's always a backstory. There's always a personal story. And I think coming out of a family where my mom was raising 3 kids on her own, she always said to us, just, go out and get an education and get a good job with a big company, So it was that mindset. And I listened to her, and I went out and joined a large packaging company in Johannesburg. So I left Cape Town, went to Johannesburg. I was also crazy about rowing. So, the Oxford and Cambridge type of rowing, not canoeing. People often think I'm talking about canoeing, but I got very involved in rowing at university and went to Joburg and wanted to row competitively, and I eventually ended up rowing for the province, which in your part of the world would be the state, and then competed at a higher level, nationally. And I think, and I got this job, and it looked like a good thing. I learned a lot. I was on a sort of graduate training program, but there was also, I was there for a few years, and there was always something. I think I was very good with my administration, and I remember looking through my filing cabinet one day. This is back in the 80s, we had those grey filing cabinets, and I was going through my files, and I remember my boss at the time would say to me, "Stephen, you need to go, and you've got an allowance. You must go out and take customers out to lunch, get to know them more than you do, So I said, no, well, I can do that. But I was going through this file and my customers, making sure everything was up to date. And then I was thinking, there's a file that's missing. And, it bothered me for some time, for days. And then in a strange way, and I really mean it, it was as if the file was what I was actually supposed to be doing with my life. And I thought about this a lot. That's the file. That's the file that's missing. So I thought about this a lot. I went to my bosses and I said, guys, listen, I love the job, and I love the sort of path that you think that I can walk in this business, but actually I'm going to leave and I'm going to pursue, something else. And for a short time, I actually joined a small business that they were kind of family friends. And then, it was very clear to me, I need to go and be with my uncle, go into the mountains again as I did as a child, and I'm going to throw caution to the wind. And so that was giving up, a paid job to be his apprentice. And I started painting in earnest, Wow. And that's, that's where it started.
Are you naturally gifted? Do you know how to paint from the get-go? No, please.
I don't know. I mean, I have taught myself. I mean, I think if any artists out there listening, the journey in art is not predictable, so you have a gut feeling about what you want to do or what you want to paint. Or so, I taught myself to work in oils and pastels, and so I was doing other paintings as well, but I was also watching my uncle going on these field trips and seeing how he was documenting paintings. I mean, as I say, he was doing this from the sort of 1950s, going out to these places and recording these sites, the scenes, and then taking the information back to the University of Cape Town or to the South African Museum in Cape Town.
And at that point, I presume it was a rather primitive level of documentation, correct? Was it pencil and paper, or was it, something, pens and,
Yeah, he had come across this system, or he had developed this sort of system with a kind of an acetate film that was very clear.
Yes, I remember that, yeah.
It was absolutely clear. And then we had a little bottle of Indian ink. And if you remember those days when there was Indian ink, I mean, you had to make sure you didn't knock it over in the shelter, which was a big problem. But fortunately that didn't happen. I think it might have happened once and the bottle was saved. And we just cleaned up the little mess that it made. But basically that and a pen.
Copy the images, right?
Yeah, off the rock. Put the film in front of the rock and trace them off, and then he'd take them back to his studio and then work, take photographs, and then with the simple cameras that he was using, and then they still, were pretty good, and then come back and then he'd put that whole, we'd color match the rock on site and then bring it back to his studio, and then he'd work on the painting there, and he
would do the paintings. This is your kin. Your uncle would do the paintings.
He would reproduce them.
Oh, my word. Come on.
He would mix up paint, and then he would paint onto this prepared canvas. And, and he had a whole lot of techniques to kind of create a rock background, and he wanted to do it as accurately as possible. And in fact, a very prominent family in South Africa, the Rupert family, they ended up, Anton Rupert, collected he called them facsimile reproductions.
Wow.
He and Anton Rupert collected these reproductions. And I think today he has over in the region of 1,600 of these reproductions.
Oh, my word. Wow. What a legacy. What a legacy.
Yeah, they're being digitized, I understand now. So in Stellenbosch, in the town of Stellenbosch near Cape Town, there's the Rupert Art Museum, and I understand that all those paintings are being digitized, and they're available, or they make them available to people who ask about them and want to learn more about what my uncle did, and certainly and look at different imagery.
But let's stop there for this will be the first segment, and we'll pick it up on the second segment. See you in the flip-flop, gang. Welcome back, everybody. This is your host, Dr. Alan Garfinkel, and we're blessed and honored to have Stephen Bassett, who's a rock art research conservationist, an artist of great merit and ancestry, and he's talking about the heritage of Africa and his passion for documenting, researching, and conserving such masterpieces on the rocks. And we're also going to talk about a little bit about some of the controversies surrounding the nature of the work that we do. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yes. So, for me, it's a lifelong journey. It has been, and I've been doing the documentation of art, and it's sort of broadened into conservation of sites, developing techniques for removal of graffiti from sites.
Right.
And that's been a very exciting part of my journey.
Well, that's exciting. I think one of the areas we're trying to develop an avenue for is to integrate indigenous people, Native Americans, Native people all over the world, with our research, our conservation, our documentation. And so that whenever we write or do or enact or believe or somehow profess to understand this resource, we need to partner with people who have ethnic affiliation, ancestral connections, and have a dog in that fight, and somehow see if we can bridge the gap, which is sometimes not so easy to do. Have you had that experience, Stephen?
Well, I would say not until recently. As I say, my grandfather was involved in this study, my uncle was, and I'm the third generation, and I've had mostly a positive response. So that is people coming to me. It could be Khoisan people, San people, or Khoi people that were traditionally herders, their ancestry, and asking me, how did our ancestors paint? And so there's been that side of things, where I've laid out all my brushes. I've gone to visit these people, and we've had good interaction.
And you've probably taught them a tremendous amount of knowledge about things that they may not have been so familiar with in terms of paint and rock and techniques for the actual fashioning of these beautiful masterpieces, yes?
Yes, correct. And, the people that I've been dealing with from certain parts of South Africa have been very positive, and I've taken, I've actually invested my own money into some of their projects. And,
right.
I'm a self-employed artist, so I'll be doing other art as well, in oil paints and other such art. But with regard to the rock art, that's really been my flagship work, because that's what I've developed over time, and that's where my knowledge base is, and that's where all my experimentation with pigments on rock. I mean, at the moment, as I talk to you, I've got several pieces of rock on my roof that I've done test panels on, and they've been there for months. And some of these panels I've been testing them over years, for weathering and rain, sun, wind, and done accelerated tests. So I think some of the people I've spoken to, the indigenous people, Khoisan, people claiming Khoisan descent, have found that very interesting. Actually, only until. So,
and probably valuable and insights, and it connects them to the land. It shows sort of the nature of the land forms and the way in which their people, their ancestors, perceived these paintings and developed a means of producing these images. Yes?
Yeah, correct. And I think it's a groundswell of interest from indigenous
Right.
communities.
So there's really two ways to think about this, and that is, and I've found that, in this business I've been in for 50 years, called cultural resources management here in the States, but there is controversy and challenges to dealing with indigenous people because their particular value system and their beliefs are sometimes not in alignment with the nature of the requirements that are identified in environmental laws or the nature of working with some of my clients that are producing energy projects or things along those lines. Have you had an experience with this?
Yes, I've just had an experience recently where a person I was speaking to, it was a particular project that could have got involved in, but, well, I'm not involved yet. It looks like I will be down the line. It's a development of a lodge in South Africa. Yeah, a lodge for tourists and in a part of South Africa. But basically, the people that were involved, the woman claimed that she was of a sort of slave descent and that, she knew her mother knew a Khoi queen and down in the Western Cape. And what was this white man doing with their art? So it was a sort of general comment like that. And I said to this woman, because look, I'm of European descent, okay? And, I said to this person, look, I see what I'm doing as, the art is part of our human evolution, our cognitive evolution. And it depends on how far back you want to go. I mean, I believe we all came from, well, a common ancestor in certain respects. But I mean, this art is a national treasure. I mean, I deal with people that have different backgrounds. I'm dealing with one person that's a Zulu background, another person that's a Xhosa background, so different Nguni people. And they also involved in rock art and tourism and making it more, promoting it in South Africa. And they are not directly Khoi or Khoisan descendants, but they feel it's part of our national heritage. And, and therefore we all have a stake in it. We all have an interest in it.
We do, absolutely.
And it's quite legitimate to go out and want to protect it, want to promote it responsibly and get people aware of the kind of beauty and the depth of meaning in the art that's out there on the rocks,
What I think there's an opportunity for you is to maybe find someone who would like to apprentice to you, who is of indigenous background or some sort of ethnic affiliation or descendants, who would like to associate with the kind of work you do in terms of documentation and conservation and research on the rock art images. And then that adds to the validity, relevance, participatory nature. That's something I've been doing for myself for quite a number of years. Is when I'm writing my research pieces, I try to involve the native people who are indigenous, who are ethnically affiliated, and participate. And that sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't. I'll tell you, you can be perceived as the golden child in one moment, and they'll throw you under the bus and you're the hind of Satan. And it just depends upon the circumstances. If your particular facility or if you're involved with making money, that is an issue. If you're dealing with archaeology, and sometimes you find that the nature of the beast is you have to either destroy or cover up or somehow impact or intrude in a prior archaeological site, especially if that site has human remains or grave goods. That's an enormously emotional situation, and that can any moment. I've had situations like that. And in general, specifically, we have to understand or respect the indigenous heritage and the cosmology, the religion, the value systems of Native people that are so different from Western Cartesian thinking. And that's where the rubber meets the road. It is so diametrically opposed that in the past, scientists have demeaned or indicated that this was, silly, primitive people who were, not really advanced in their understanding. That has gone by the by to some extent, but not fully. And you know what I'm talking
about. Yeah, I do. And I just think that we all, in some way, people seem to be drawn to the art or to the imagery, whether it's, a very abstract.
Images have power to native people.
Immense power.
To native people, these images and the rocks themselves are alive. These are living beings. These are agents that are associated with, key figures in their cosmology, their mythology, the sacred narratives that the native people have. And you're aware of that. You've run into that often, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't, and I think it's cross-cultural, in a sense that
it is cross-cultural.
And you and I can appreciate it, and it can speak to us. I mean, I have many people coming to me. I have academics coming to me saying, look, we can't, I call them my documentary paintings. And I mean,
right.
I'm working towards another exhibition. So in my studio, if I look to my right here, I've got these canvases on the wall that are all, been meticulously rendered over, taken weeks and sometimes months and sometimes years.
Let's stop it right here for a moment, and we'll pick this up on the next segment. See you in the flip-flop, gang. Okay, this is the third segment of episode 152 of your Rock Art podcast. We are blessed and honored to have Stephen Bassett with us, who's talking about his rock art research, his conservation, his paintings that he does, and what value they have and how they're perceived by the general public and the indigenous people as well. Stephen, take it away.
Thank you. Alan, it's an interesting discussion, this, and I think, everyone involved in this topic, the subject, has a path to navigate. I think for me, what's been super exciting over the years is the development of my knowledge around the pigments, paints, and implements. That's been how were these paintings put onto the rock and how come we're still seeing them. So that's been a big part, and it's ongoing, the research into that and finding ochre, binding agents. I've had to go out into the countryside. I had many years ago to learn to shoot an animal. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but basically to reenact, to almost think like a hunter-gatherer, and then, shoot the animal, harvest from it hair, blood, fat, etc., and make implements right from sort of the bottom up, the ground up, because there's very little in the written record. No full artist toolkit has ever been discovered in a cave in South Africa. There are remnants of, say, a carapace of a tortoise or some item, a stone that has a pigment on it. But in terms of the implements used and how the paintings were executed, so that's been an exciting part for me.
Tell me about your most astounding discovery. Yeah, what rings your chimes, and what did you discover from these replicative efforts, these experimental archaeology as it was?
Well, I think one of them is how very stable earth pigments are. And if mixed with the correct binding agents, they're incredibly resilient on a rock surface. Obviously, my experience has been done some on rock surfaces where it's attached to a wall still, the rock. There are no paintings. It's not a site. It's just a...
How long does a painting last?
Work I've done, decades. It's still on the rock, So... and I've done accelerated tests as well, putting my samples under compressed air, water under pressure, things like that. So, but what I'm saying is also the digital world, the image enhancement software that there is today, programs like D-Stretch and others, where I can go to a site now. I've got some of these apps on my phone. I can do a preliminary visit to a site and take photographs with my camera or my phone, and then see so much more that's on the rock surface. So with my documentary paintings, whereas before I would be bringing to the viewer imagery that I had deciphered from the rock surface, but very faint imagery. It was, imagery that one couldn't even see with the naked eye. You didn't even know it was there. Now with these image enhancement software programs, I can put that into my documentary painting. So my documentary painting today, which is millimeter accurate, using blood, plant juices in my paint, has I can bring more to the public eye, to the viewer, to research the research table with what I've been able to decipher and then put onto my canvas. So I found that academics have come to me saying, listen, we're writing an academic article. Could we use this particular documentary painting you've done?
Sure.
Because it helps illustrate our article. It's clear. And obviously I don't put in any imagery like the leg of an antelope that I can't see. Even with image enhancement software, it's completely disappeared from the rock. I can't just put that in. So I try to be as accurate as possible, and I find it tremendously exciting. I mean, I'm working on a piece at the moment. You asked about some of the pieces I've seen, or the friezes. It's a rain animal with eels attached to it, and it's barely visible on the rock surface. And with all these techniques, suddenly there are probably about 10 or so eels attached to this rain animal and other appendages and dots and lines. And I mean, this is almost lost from sight, from the rock surface. So
sure.
It's kind of, and that I find very challenging. And I enjoy the rock art community, the academic community in South Africa is strong, and they, we do work together. I'm on a forum where we have discussions, and we can feed each other with information. But I think they're doing tremendous work. And I'd like to have this exhibition. I'd like to produce another book, but these things, as you know, they all cost money and time. And I'm running a young family. I got married late because I was walking around the mountains for most of my life. Alan, I only got married at 50 years old. Fortunately, I found a beautiful woman, much younger than me.
Congratulations.
And we've had a child, and she had a little girl. So I've got two children, a stepchild and Paul, our son, and who's 16 years old now. And it's been a wonderful journey, And I think with what we do, you and I and all the other people that are involved in this, for me, it's irrelevant what your background is. It's where your heart is and the importance you see in the work and how we can play a positive role in preserving it and bring it to a wider public. Because my experience is whether a person's sitting in London, banking environment, or some of the people that I've had interaction with, they could be sitting in Europe somewhere in a very first world environment, in a city environment. They just want to connect with this work. They're fascinated by it. They would like a print, and that's, a print of what I do, for example, an art print. And I mean, I respect, I have great respect every time I go to a rock shelter, what I'm doing, documenting it. And as I say, where I'm able to pass on financially or with my knowledge to Indigenous peoples, the sort of fruits of what I'm doing. So there's always that side to it, especially when finances are involved or there's any kind of income coming in from what you do, there are questions that can be asked, and then you've got to be able to answer them. And I feel I can, but as we said earlier, it's a sensitive subject that we're involved in, and we have to find a way to navigate through that, and as you said, in partnership with Indigenous people. And that's the best solution, and some are very amenable to that and others are very sensitive and almost, aggressive towards any kind of outside interference, Right. But, one has to say, well, what are you doing about the conservation of your art? I mean, and that's also, I could get shouted down for that, but I mean, I've now developed techniques for removal of graffiti, and I've worked at probably 25 sites in South Africa. I've been employed by heritage authorities in South Africa to go to these sites in the Drakensberg and in the Western Cape and in other parts of the country to remove graffiti that has been put at these sites, not on the paintings, sometimes on the paintings, but near the paintings, and degraded the site, So to clean that site, obviously with great care and with counsel from archaeologists. One can't do any work like that without a permit from the Heritage Authority in South Africa. I do that, get the permit, go and do the work, and it's just incredible how the art jumps out after that offensive graffiti has been removed.
Praise God for your efforts. That's just wonderful. No, it's really wonderful. It's a blessing that you can, transact all these different niches. We've got the academicians, we've got the clients, we've got the customers, we've got the native people. It's always a journey, isn't it? It's always an interesting journey. And it's a blessing that we're able to connect over the smiles and miles and share your passion and my passion for the things we call rock art, which are really images on stone that relate to the indigenous native religion and their value systems and their cosmology.
No, I agree with you. And I think, I must say, this is the first time I've been introduced to your podcast and to your organization, and it'd be good to stay in touch,
Please.
After this discussion, and we can share information and ideas, and it'd be good,
Amen.
Amen to that.
God bless you, Stephen.
Thank you.
See you in the flip-flop, gang.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. Find show notes and contact information at www.arcpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends. The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.